one of the one of the grammar rock hits that doesn't usually get mentioned. If you remember interjection.
Oh, interjection.
Interjection. Yes. You remember that one?
The crowd starting to shout.
Exclamation points. Exclamation points about how things change. Mm-hmm. Like we're not going to trade somebody now or in October. If you just text that to somebody, that's one thing. But when you add the interjection at the end, you mean business. We're not going to trade Jonathan Taylor now or in October. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's a difference.
Right. Yeah. Emphatic.
Wow. That interjection got changed to a query, a question, an open question. And the man who got that interjection texted him, had to get him on the phone. When Jonathan Taylor has now been shown the door to go seek a trade. Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated back on the Rich Eisen Show. How's that for an introduction, Albert? How about that?
Yeah. Hear me, Rich?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. I just had to walk outside the media room, so I'm all good.
Okay. So what happened to the exclamation point? What happened to that exclamation point that you got texted?
I think it's a question. Well, as you had said to me, I think it was a question mark right now. Maybe it was a typo. I don't know. This situation hasn't gotten better. That's for sure. And I don't know that the back and forth back then. What was that 3 weeks ago? Helped much. And you do wonder if it's the point of no return now. And the trouble is, Rich, I know that the Colts are resolute that they're not going to give him away. So, then the question becomes, like, what if he goes out and finds a team that's willing to give him what he wants monetarily, right? And say that's, I don't know, $12, $13, $14 million a year. And then that team is not willing to go to where the Colts want them to go from a compensation standpoint. Wouldn't that make the situation worse?
Oh, yeah.
Because now Jonathan Taylor isn't guessing anymore that they're keeping him from getting paid, that they're keeping him from getting paid. Now he knows, right? So that's what's complicated about this whole thing now is like this could bring it to a conclusion one way or the other. It could be that Jonathan Taylor finds that what he wants isn't out there for him, or it could lead to a trade. But there's this in-between thing where, I certainly think having talked to, a whole bunch of teams last night, overnight, I polled, I think, 10, 11 executives last night on what his trade value would be. And, I can just tell you, like, when you add the fact that you have to give him a new contract to it, I'm not sure the trade value is quite what the Colts would accept at this point. Now, maybe that'll change, but yeah, this is definitely in a very, very awkward spot.
I kind of feel like we're getting bookends to our non-playing season, Albert. This rings similar to Lamar Jackson. Do we want Lamar? Sure. Yeah. How much is it going to cost? And 2 1s? I don't know. Like, that's the way it appears. That obviously Jonathan Taylor's not a free agent technically, although he has been given the opportunity to seek a trade like he is a free agent, knocking on anybody's doors legally. Mm-hmm. But the question is compensation and compensation for the Colts. So let's take this one step at a time. Why won't the Colts pay Jonathan Taylor something, or have they offered? And that's been part of the impasse as well, that Jonathan Taylor only wants a contract similar to what he might get on the open market. What do you think, Albert?
I mean, to this point, they haven't, as far as I know, and maybe things changed in the last few days. As far as I know, there hasn't been like a substantial offer made. Now, again, that might have changed in the last few days, and maybe that's what prompted this. But it sounds to me like the Colts were resolute on saying we're waiting until next year. And part of that, of course, is the way this has gone over the last month, where he's coming off ankle surgery to begin with. Now the question whether or not he had a back injury is obviously one that's been disputed. But like whether that's a question that's out there, and that's something else that you throw another log on the fire. And I think at this point, like it's the Colts would feel more comfortable going through the year with him. And Jonathan Taylor knows. I mean, look, if you're Jonathan Taylor and you have all that mileage on your legs, and think about the amount of carries that he had over his first 5 years. Then he gets hurt in year 6, right? So his first 3 years at Wisconsin, his 3 years at Wisconsin, his first 2 years at the pros, how much he carried the ball. He stayed healthy. He was consistent, reliable, all that. Finally gets hurt in that 6th year of college and pro, right? And, now, he is probably looking around and saying, well, Saquon Barkley was patient. Josh Jacobs was patient. And it didn't really work out for those two. So why should I be patient? Things, I'm sure part of it for him is the concern that if he gets hurt again, it's really going to damage his value. And that, by the way, doubles is the reason why maybe the Colts would be hesitant. And that's what makes this thing a little bit, I would say, tough for both sides.
And can you give me an indication? Is it Jim Irsay saying no and Ballard playing shuttle diplomacy to make this work? Or is Ballard, truly saying, we're not paying you any more money? Or did they put anything on the table? I'm trying to suss out why we have reached this point, Albert.
Well, they've been pretty clear in that and saying that we're willing to talk about a contract after this year and not before the year. I think if you look at their history, they have taken care of a lot of the guys that Ballard's drafted there, right? They made Quentin Nelson wait until after his 4th year, but they paid him at the top of the market. Darius Leonard got paid after his 3rd year. So, they've paid guys that they've drafted there after 3 years, and then there have been other guys where they've let it run out, like guys that they really like. Bobby Okereke is a good example of it, a guy who was a really good player for them for 4 years, and now he's on the Giants, because they decided we're going to let this play out, and we can't invest any more in that position, and so we'd be happy to keep him, but we're going to see where this goes after a 4th year, and you see what happened there. So yeah, Rich. I mean, the indications I've gotten are that at this point, at least, the Colts have been in lockstep on waiting until after year 4, and I will plead ignorance on. I'm not quite sure whether or not Chris has any sort of issue with his owner's public stance on that. Possible he does. I just haven't heard that.
Well, I would just imagine, Anthony Richardson's been drafted. Steichen's been hired. Let's roll. Let's see what this can happen. When you drafted Anthony Richardson on the night in Kansas City, you're sitting here thinking, all right, him, Jonathan Taylor, and our new coach that just did what he did with Jalen Hurts, let's go. That's it. Let's roll.
And that's what I think so hard about it. To me, it's, you look at the position Shane Steichen's been put in. You know what I mean? He's trying to establish a culture and build a program and all those different things. And now, the owners at loggerheads with maybe one of the most respected guys in the locker room, one of the best players in the team. It's hard, when you're trying to set standards and say, this is what we'll reward, and then you've got this guy over here, and I was at their practice today, and he's standing with a hoodie pulled up over his head and, just looks uncomfortable being there. You know what I mean? It's really hard when, players look over, again, at, one of the most respected guys in the locker room and see that. And then, like you said, what better friend would there be for a young quarterback than having Jonathan Taylor next to you? When we saw what having Todd Gurley did for Jared Goff in L.A., we saw what having Zeke Elliott at the peak of his powers did for Dak Prescott in Dallas when they came in together. Even Ryan Tannehill, who's a veteran, but having Derrick Henry next to him did a lot to help resuscitate Ryan Tannehill's career in Tennessee. You can talk all you want. You can talk till you're blue in the face about running back value and the risk in paying guys and everything else. If you're paying $12 or $13 million to put a premier player right next to your quarterback that's going to help you take the burden off of that quarterback and help you develop that quarterback, I think it's an investment well made. But, obviously there are some people that disagree with that.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Do we know, where you're sitting here assuming what Jonathan Taylor is going to want? He's going to want McCaffrey money. Certainly if the Colts want McCaffrey capital in terms of draft picks back, and if a team does that, they're going to want more than just 1 year of certainty. You can't just do what I guess Dalvin just did with the Jets and vice versa. They're going to. So, man, there's a lot of moving parts here. How's this going to work, and who might be interested? Best on your reporting.
So, the Colts, the Colts have said that they want the equivalent of a first-round pick. Now, it doesn't have to be a 1. You know, it can be a mix of players and picks. It was interesting because, again, I fired off at the airport last night, and I fired off a bunch of texts and said to pose the question to a bunch of, GMs, assistant GMs, vice presidents, player personnel, and I asked them the question, like, what would it, if you were giving Jonathan Taylor a contract, what would you pay in a draft pick on top of that to complete a trade? And the answer I got back was almost uniform across the board, which was somewhere in the day 2 range, second or third rounder, maybe a third package with something else. Like almost all the responses I got back were right in that range, which right now is less than the Colts are willing to take. But, you know, if somebody comes with like a 2 and a 5 or 2 and a 4, maybe the Colts do it. I don't know. I mean, I think you can look at that and say if you're the Colts, well, we're getting back the draft pick that we gave to take them in 2020. Again, I don't think that's great value based on what he means to your team. But if they're just looking to get out of the situation, then maybe, you know, you can feel okay about that. And as far as teams that would be interested, you know, the 2 that really stick out to me, like one would be Miami, just because of how aggressive they've been with Mike McDaniel as their coach the last couple of years. They were, I mean, on the doorstep of completing a trade for Dalvin Cook back in March. I think we've talked about this. They backed out at the last minute. There were a few things that gave them cold feet. They drafted a kid, Devin A-Chain, from Texas A&M to sort of be like the big play guy in their backfield, and now he's hurt. So, you know, I think the Dolphins have cap space. They have draft picks. They could do it, you know. So the Dolphins would be one. And imagine Jonathan Taylor and Mike McDaniel's run game. And then, you know, the other one that's sort of interesting is the Bears. Matt Eberflus was with Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis. Yep. The general manager in Chicago, Ryan Poles, worked with Chris Ballard for years in Kansas City. They're very close. And if you look at the way that they played offense last year, they got to cut down on the amount they're putting on Justin Fields in the running game. They just have to, you know. And what better way to do that than bring in a top 5 running back, you know? So, and the Bears have all of that draft pick capital now from the trade back in, back in March when they traded out of the number 1 pick. So those would be the 2 teams that I would just sort of keep an eye on, and I think would be interesting at least. And again, like I think, you know, for Jonathan Taylor, it would be pretty good fit.
Wouldn't it be ironic, Albert, then, or coincidental, I don't know, that the Bears used the capital that they got from Carolina, that they got in the McCaffrey trade, for Taylor to the team that's looking for McCaffrey value? And, you know, I mean, like that would be wild. And obviously Miami being able to say, all right, New England, you got Zeke, and all right, Jets, you got Dalvin, and all right, Buffalo, we're coming for you too. We got Jonathan Taylor. But the question is are they, like, what is Taylor asking monetarily? We know around what the Colts might be willing to accept to, as you pointed out, get out of this. What do you know about what Jonathan Taylor is potentially asking for, Albert?
I don't get the sense that it's like crazy off the board, like, you know, what Le'Veon Bell was hoping for, you know, all those years ago. But I think you have to pay him a market deal, right? Like, so look at what Alvin Kamara got. Look at what Dalvin Cook got. You know, Zeke Elliott and Christian McCaffrey, I think, are probably the 2 guys that were the outliers. And they were, I think, at about $16 million per. And in both cases, those guys wound up getting hurt, you know, and, you know, I think you look at how that played out, and, you know, the Panthers, I think, probably have some regret over doing it, doing what they did, as good a player as McCaffrey is, and the Cowboys, too, with Zeke. So, you know, I do think, like, in this situation, my guess would be he would settle for something maybe a little less than what Zeke or Christian got, but certainly maybe a notch above what your Nick Chubbs, your Derrick Henrys, your you know, your Dalvin Cooks and your Alvin Kamara's got. So in that $13-14 million range, I think you'd have a hard time walking away from that.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. You know, I know you just mentioned before, too, that, you know, the Colts have opened up the door for this to be hitting the point of no return if Jonathan Taylor finds the team willing to pay him what he feels he's worth. and the Colts won't pull the trigger because they feel the compensation they're going to get back for Taylor isn't what Taylor is worth. And I'm like thinking that horse has already left the barn because Taylor's like, all right, you won't pay me what I think I'm worth, but on the trade market, you'll value me what I think I'm worth. And, you know, and I think
it's ugly.
I think it's there, though.
I mean, uglier, I guess. It's already ugly.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I think it is there because he's like, pay me like the top talent. You know I am, and I know I am, and we know collectively I am. And now it's time for, after they say no, and they're like, go seek a trade, and then we hear what they're eager to get back for him. That is what you would value somebody that's paid a certain way, and they won't pay him that. And I think the fact that he's standing there too, and again, I understand, you know, the Colts have their ways or standards or whatever, but you got a new coach and you got a new quarterback. Don't you think it is worth the money just for that alone? Like, all right, I understand you have the leverage and you don't have to pay him, and you do want to wait for the ultimate leverage of the franchise tag next year, and that's the way it's normally done. But it's rubber's meeting the road with your new coach and your new quarterback. Having Jonathan Taylor out there with his infectious personality rather than standing, that photograph you took today is so jarring. You know, don't you think like it's time to do that? And maybe, just maybe, the Colts will come to that reckoning in the next week? Or that's it?
And I think what's smart about doing a deal now, and that's just me, right? But, you know, I understand teams don't want to pay for past performance, right? But the guy has definitely outperformed what you paid him. No question, right? No one would argue that. And, like, if you do a deal now rather than a year from now, you actually might be mitigating some of the risk. Because you know how these deals work. It's the first 2 or 3 years, first 2 or a portion of the third, whatever it is guaranteed, then you can get out of it. Well, if you do a deal now, yes, you're paying him some money up front that you wouldn't have otherwise, but then you're also on the back end probably going to be out of the guarantees earlier. So if it is your intention to sign him long-term after this year, then, you know, I think you're actually running more risk that age is going to catch up to him, and it's going to look like a bad deal 3 or 4 years down the line than if you did it now, because you have an ability to escape from the deal earlier. So I think to me, it's like, I look at like what the Browns did, right? And the Browns, to me, and I'm not saying the Browns are the model franchise, but I know I brought this up to you before, Rich, they're the most analytically driven franchise in the league, probably, right? Like what Andrew Barry and Kevin Stefanski do, Paul DePodesta, all that. So, like, they, on paper, would be the team that'd be least likely to pay a running back. Do you know what they did, though? They paid a running back. And why did they pay a running back? Because Nick Chubb was just that important to who they are, and was just that important to what they do, and was just that big a part of their identity. I think Jonathan Taylor is that guy for the Colts. You know, so I look at it, and it's like, if there's an exception to be made, I think this is a guy who is worth making the exception for, even to the point where if he came back to me and he said, okay, the Dolphins are willing to give me a $14 million a year deal, but they're not going to meet your draft pick compensation. You know what I would say? I would say, well, maybe we'll do the deal that they offered you. You know what I mean? And then they've negotiated an extension for you. Again, I don't know if the Colts would even consider that based on how ugly this has gotten, but it would seem to be one way out of it, where you're keeping a very, very important player on your team. And, you know, Shane Steichen in year one is showing that he's going to reward people who do things the right way, which is exactly how Taylor handled his first 3 years in the league and everything up until his contract dispute.
Well, then again, I hope this isn't like the Lamar Jackson part 2, in the fact that teams might not want to do that for fear of negotiating
the deal for him,
deal for a team. And you just laid it out. That other teams might be like, yeah, there's no reason for us to offer a contract, so Chris Ballard just matches it, and we just unzipped our 3 weeks before the beginning of the season. It's unbelievable. Albert, thanks for joining us in the middle of the day, watching this all play out in front of you. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. So it was definitely a weird one. I can't remember the last time I had a guy with a trade request who wasn't practicing, who was standing there 5 feet away. But I guess every day's a new day.
So I guess in the last couple seconds I have here, he's physically unwilling to perform, and the Colts have him on physically unable to perform because they're not going to NFI him. I mean, seriously, like that's what's happening, right?
He's redefining the PUP list.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Albert. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Right.
That's
All right,
Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. Follow him at Albert Breer. Must follow. Love chatting with him. That's the latest.
Man, oh, man.
In reality football. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.